Just 1 minute ago, a quiet but powerful shift rippled through the monarchy, one that no one saw coming. Princess Anne, the royal family's most disciplined traditionalist, has handed over one of the most symbolic roles in the monarchy, hosting the Christmas celebration. And the person she chose? Catherine. But this isn't just a festive gesture, it's a move loaded with meaning, signaling a change that could redefine royal power itself. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Because what just happened may appear subtle on the surface, but beneath it lies a shift that could quietly reshape the entire structure of royal influence. There was no announcement leading up to it, no gradual transition, no carefully staged moment to prepare the public or the palace. The decision simply arrived complete, final, and impossible to ignore. And that absence of buildup is what makes it so striking. In a system where even the smallest changes are often anticipated, discussed, and managed, this move felt different. Immediate. Intentional. As though it had been decided long ago, waiting for the exact moment to be revealed. The role itself carries more weight than it may appear. Hosting the royal Christmas celebration is not just about tradition or ceremony, it is about visibility, presence, and subtle authority. It is one of the few moments where hierarchy is not just maintained, but displayed, where relationships are observed, where roles are reinforced without a single word being spoken. And to hold that position is to stand, even briefly, at the center of the family's internal dynamic. That is why Anne's decision feels so significant. Because she is not someone who relinquishes responsibility lightly. Her entire reputation has been built on consistency, on duty, on an unwavering commitment to maintaining the structure of the monarchy. For someone like her to step aside from such a symbolic role suggests something more than convenience. It suggests intention, a choice that carries meaning beyond the immediate. And then there is Catherine. The choice itself raises as many questions as it answers. Why her? Why now? Because while Catherine has steadily grown in influence, this moment places her in a position that goes beyond quiet presence. It brings her forward, into a role that demands attention, that signals trust, that implies readiness. And that implication is difficult to ignore. There is also an emotional undertone to this transition that cannot be overlooked. Roles like this are not just responsibilities, they are reflections of identity within the monarchy. To step away from them is not just a logistical change, it is a personal one. And for Anne, whose identity has long been tied to her role as a guardian of tradition, that shift carries weight. It suggests a willingness to allow something new to emerge, even if that means redefining her own place in the process. Inside the palace, speculation has already begun to take shape. Quiet conversations, measured reactions, an undercurrent of curiosity mixed with uncertainty. Because decisions like this do not exist in isolation. They ripple outward, influencing perception, altering expectations, shifting the way roles are understood. And while the move itself may seem contained, its implications are anything but. What makes this moment even more compelling is the sense that it is not as simple as it appears. That beneath the gesture lies something more deliberate, more strategic, more carefully considered than anyone is openly acknowledging. Because in the monarchy, symbolism is never accidental. Every action carries weight, every decision sends a message. And now, that message is being interpreted in real time. Is this a gesture of trust, a recognition of Catherine's growing role within the family? Or is it something more calculated, a quiet transfer of influence that signals a deeper shift in power? But this wasn't just a spontaneous decision, it was the result of years of observation, quiet influence, and a bond that had been forming behind the scenes. Princess Anne has never chased attention, but within the monarchy, her influence is undeniable. Known for discipline, loyalty, and an unwavering commitment to tradition, she has long been the quiet force holding royal customs together. So for someone like Anne to step back from such a symbolic role, something significant must have changed. An understanding that change reveals more than anyone expected. Because Anne's decisions are never casual, never impulsive, and certainly never without purpose. They are deliberate, measured, and often speak louder than any public declaration ever could. For decades, Anne has embodied consistency in an institution that depends on it. While others adapted, evolved, or occasionally stepped into controversy, she remained constant. Reliable. Focused. A figure who did not seek influence through visibility but through action. She carried responsibility not as a burden, but as a defining element of who she was within the monarchy. And that reputation did not come from a single moment. It was built over years of unwavering commitment to maintaining the structure that others relied on. Her role in preserving tradition cannot be overstated. Anne was not just participating in royal customs, she was protecting them, ensuring that the rituals, the ceremonies, the quiet signals of continuity remained intact, even as the world around the monarchy changed. She understood that these traditions were more than appearances, they were anchors, grounding the institution in something stable, something recognizable. And in doing so, she became one of the most trusted figures within that system. That is what makes her decision so powerful. Because stepping away from a role like hosting the Christmas celebration is not simply a logistical change, it is a symbolic one. It represents a shift, not just in responsibility but in identity. And for someone whose identity has been so closely tied to duty, that shift carries emotional weight. It suggests a willingness to allow something new to take shape, even if it means redefining her own position within the monarchy. What is perhaps most striking is Anne's long-standing resistance to change. She has never been known for embracing transformation lightly. Her strength has always been rooted in stability, in maintaining what works rather than altering it, which makes this moment feel even more significant. Because for Anne to initiate change rather than resist it suggests that the need for that change has become undeniable. There are subtle indications that this decision was not made suddenly, that it had been considered, perhaps even planned, long before it was revealed. Small shifts in how roles were approached, in how responsibilities were distributed, in how Catherine's presence within the monarchy began to expand. None of it obvious, none of it announced. But together, they form a pattern, one that points toward preparation rather than reaction. Anne's perspective on leadership is also crucial to understanding this moment. She does not lead through dominance or visibility. She leads through judgment, through an ability to assess, to observe, to determine when the time has come for something to change. And when she acts, it is rarely about stepping away, it is about choosing who steps forward. That distinction is essential. Because Anne does not relinquish influence, she redirects it. And in doing so, she ensures that the structure she has spent years preserving continues, even as it evolves. That is the quiet power behind her decision. Not the act itself, but the intention behind it. And if Anne made this choice deliberately, then the real focus shifts to the person she selected to take her place, Catherine. For years, Catherine stood within the royal family, not at its center, but always close to it. Observing, learning, adapting. But now, everything changes. Being handed the role of hosting the Christmas celebration isn't just an honor, it's a statement. A signal that Catherine is no longer preparing for leadership, she's stepping into it. And with that step comes expectations, pressure, and a spotlight unlike anything before. Because this moment doesn't just elevate her position, it transforms how she is seen, both inside the palace and beyond it. Catherine's journey to this point has been defined by patience. She was never the loudest presence, never the one pushing for attention or authority. Instead, she built her role carefully, piece by piece, understanding that within the monarchy, influence is not always given, it is earned. She watched, she listened, she adapted to an environment where every action carries meaning, and every misstep is amplified. And through that process, she developed something far more powerful than visibility: credibility. That credibility is what makes this transition so significant. Because stepping into a role like hosting the Christmas celebration is not simply about being chosen, it is about being trusted. Trusted to represent the family, to manage its dynamics, to carry the weight of tradition while subtly shaping its direction. And that level of trust is not granted lightly, especially by someone like Anne, whose standards are defined by discipline and precision. There is also a symbolic weight to this role that extends beyond its surface. The Christmas celebration is one of the rare moments where the monarchy presents itself not just as an institution but as a family. It is where unity is not just implied, it is displayed. and to be the one who hosts that moment is to be positioned at the center of that unity. It is to become the figure through which that image is projected, the one who holds the space where relationships are both revealed and reinforced. For Catherine, that positioning carries emotional significance, because it represents a shift from supporting the structure to shaping it, from participating in tradition to guiding it. And that shift is not just external, it is internal. It changes how she must see herself within the monarchy, how she approaches her role, how she carries the expectations now placed upon her. Public perception plays a role in this transformation as well. Catherine has long been seen as a figure who bridges two worlds, traditional enough to respect the monarchy's history, yet modern enough to connect with a changing audience. This moment reinforces that perception. It places her in a position where those qualities are not just appreciated but required, where her ability to balance continuity and change becomes central to how the monarchy is understood moving forward. What makes this moment even more compelling is the sense that it is part of something larger, that Catherine's influence has not just grown, it has reached a point where it can no longer remain subtle. It is becoming visible, undeniable, and increasingly central to the monarchy's direction. And that visibility changes everything. Because once influence becomes visible, it begins to shape expectations in ways that cannot be reversed. The realization begins to take hold that this is not just a role, it is a signal, a shift in status, in perception, in responsibility. A moment that marks the transition from potential to presence, from preparation to action. And with that transition comes a new reality, one where Catherine is no longer on the edge of the monarchy's future, but at the heart of it. But in the monarchy, no role is ever just ceremonial, and this particular tradition carries meaning that runs far deeper than most realize. To the outside world, the royal Christmas celebration looks like tradition, formal, elegant, predictable. But inside the monarchy, it represents something far more powerful. It's a moment where hierarchy is displayed, relationships are reinforced, and influence becomes visible without being spoken. So when that role changes hands, it doesn't just shift a tradition, it shifts the balance of power. And what appears to be a graceful handover begins to reveal itself as something far more deliberate, far more revealing. Because within the royal structure, tradition is never just about ceremony, it is about control. Every detail, every interaction, every subtle gesture carries weight. The Christmas celebration in particular is not simply a gathering. It is a carefully orchestrated display of unity, where positions are not announced, but understood. Who greets whom first? Who speaks? Who listens? Who leads the tone of the room? These are not random moments. They are signals, quiet, precise, and deeply intentional. The host of this event becomes the unseen architect of those signals. They decide the atmosphere, the flow, the emotional rhythm of the gathering. They influence how the family presents itself, both to one another and to the outside world. And in doing so, they shape perception. Not through authority that is declared, but through authority that is felt. It is a form of influence that does not need to be spoken to be understood. This is why the role carries such significance. Because it exists in that rare space where visibility and control intersect. The host is seen, acknowledged, and yet their influence operates beneath the surface. It is subtle, but it is undeniable. And over time, those who have held this role have used it not just to maintain tradition, but to reinforce their position within the monarchy's internal structure. History has shown that those who host such moments often define them. They set expectations. They establish patterns. They create an emotional tone that lingers long after the event itself has passed. And in doing so, they quietly shape the narrative of the monarchy, what it represents, how it feels, how it is remembered. This is not passive responsibility. It is active, strategic, and deeply influential. For Catherine, stepping into this role means stepping into that space of quiet authority. It means being placed at the center of a moment where every action carries meaning, where every decision contributes to a larger story. And that story is not just about a single celebration, it is about the direction of the monarchy itself. Because the way this event unfolds will not just reflect current dynamics, it will influence future ones. There is also an unspoken reality that makes this shift even more significant. In a system where hierarchy is rarely challenged openly, Changes like this become the language through which transformation is expressed. They are not loud, they are not confrontational, but they are clear. They signal movement, adjustment, and at times, a redefinition of roles that were once considered fixed. And that is what makes this moment so compelling. Because it is not just about Catherine being given responsibility, it is about Catherine being given influence. A position that allows her to shape not just an event, but an atmosphere. Not just a tradition, but a perception. And once that influence is established, it does not simply disappear. It evolves. It expands. It becomes part of a larger shift that is still unfolding. The realization begins to settle in that this is not just a ceremonial transition. It is a strategic one. A movement that carries implications far beyond a single gathering. Because when influence changes hands within the monarchy, it rarely stops at one moment. It begins a chain reaction that reshapes everything around it. And if influence is being passed to Catherine, then the question becomes, how are other senior royals reacting to this shift? No official statements. No visible reactions. But inside the palace, silence rarely means calm. As Anne's decision settles in, the royal family finds itself adjusting to a subtle but undeniable shift. Because when roles change at this level, they don't just affect events, they affect relationships. And within that silence, something far more complex is beginning to unfold. What appears controlled on the surface is, beneath it, a quiet recalibration of power, emotion, and unspoken understanding. The immediate reaction is not chaos, but something far more telling. Restraint. Conversations become shorter, more deliberate. Words are chosen carefully, and in some cases not chosen at all. Because in an institution built on composure, reactions are rarely visible in real time. They are absorbed, processed, and then expressed through distance, tone, and subtle shifts in behavior. And those shifts, though quiet, begin to ripple through the family structure. For some, this change is accepted with quiet acknowledgement. A recognition that transitions are inevitable, that roles evolve, that influence must eventually pass from one generation to the next. But for others, the adjustment is less comfortable. Not because the decision itself is unexpected, but because of what it represents. A movement. A signal that something long-standing is beginning to shift, and that shift cannot be reversed. There is also the weight of hierarchy, an invisible framework that has guided interactions for decades. When a role like this changes hands, it subtly redefines that framework. It alters how individuals relate to one another, how authority is perceived, how influence is distributed. And even without a single word spoken, those changes are felt. In pauses, in glances, in the careful navigation of conversations that suddenly carry more meaning than before. The absence of public acknowledgement only intensifies this internal tension. Because silence in this context is not neutrality, it is strategy. A way to prevent escalation, to maintain control, to avoid drawing attention to something that is already quietly significant. But that same silence also creates space for interpretation, for uncertainty, for questions that are not being answered, but are very much being asked. Emotionally, the shift is layered. There is pride in seeing continuity take shape through Catherine's growing role. There is respect for Anne's decision to step aside with intention rather than necessity. But there is also something more complicated, a sense of displacement, of recalibration, of understanding that the balance within the family is no longer exactly what it once was. And that realization does not come with clear resolution. What makes this moment particularly striking is how controlled it appears from the outside. There are no visible fractures, no public disagreements, no immediate signs of conflict. And yet, beneath that surface, the adjustment is real. It is ongoing. It is shaping how the family moves forward, even if that movement is not yet visible to those watching from afar. Because this is how change happens within the monarchy, not through sudden upheaval, but through quiet transformation. Through decisions that seem small, but carry weight far beyond their immediate context. And once those decisions are made, they begin to influence everything around them, whether acknowledged or not. The realization begins to settle in that this moment is not just being observed, it is being felt. Internally, personally, and in ways that may not fully reveal themselves until much later. Because when the balance shifts, even slightly, it leaves an impact that cannot simply be undone. And while the palace processes this change internally, the public response begins to shape the narrative in an entirely different way. Within minutes, the reaction began, and it wasn't subtle. Catherine's new role didn't just capture attention, it sparked emotion. For some, it's a sign of progress. For others, it raises questions about tradition and timing. But one thing is clear: the public isn't just watching this moment, they're interpreting it. And in doing so, they may be redefining what royal leadership looks like. The response spreads fast, almost instinctively, as if something long anticipated has finally taken shape. Conversations ignite across platforms, voices rising not in confusion, but in feelings strong, immediate, deeply personal. Supporters frame Catherine as a symbol of renewal, someone who bridges the past and the future without rejecting either. They speak of her calm presence, her consistency, her ability to connect without forcing attention. And now, with this new role, those qualities are no longer subtle, they are central. But not everyone reacts with certainty. Beneath the praise, there is hesitation. Questions begin to surface, not aggressive but persistent. Why now? Why this role? Why this shift at this moment in time? For some, the timing feels deliberate, almost too precise to be coincidental. And in that precision, they sense something deeper, something that goes beyond celebration and into intention. The emotional connection between Catherine and the public becomes impossible to ignore. It isn't just about admiration, it's about recognition. People see in her a reflection of stability in uncertain times, a figure who carries responsibility without appearing consumed by it, and that perception strengthens with every passing reaction. Because in a monarchy where distance has often defined authority, Catherine seems to represent something closer, something more accessible, even within the structure of tradition. At the same time, the debate begins to take shape: tradition versus evolution, continuity versus change. Some argue that roles like this should remain untouched, preserved as they have always been, because they represent the very foundation of the monarchy. Others counter that evolution is not betrayal, it is survival. And in that argument, Catherine becomes more than a person, she becomes a symbol of where the monarchy might be heading. Generational differences sharpen the divide. Older voices lean toward preservation, toward the comfort of familiar patterns. Younger perspectives push for adaptation, for relevance, for a monarchy that reflects the world as it is now, not as it once was. And between those perspectives lies a tension that cannot be easily resolved, because both sides believe they are protecting something essential. As the reactions build, something subtle but powerful begins to happen. The narrative is no longer controlled solely by the institution, it is being shaped by the people observing it. Their interpretations, their emotions, their expectations begin to influence how this moment is understood. And that shift, though intangible, carries weight. Because perception, once formed, is difficult to reshape. Catherine's role, once defined by the palace, is now being redefined by the public. Not officially, not formally, but emotionally. And in that emotional space, influence grows. It expands beyond titles, beyond ceremonies, into something more fluid and more powerful. Something that cannot be easily contained. What began as a single decision is now something larger, a reflection of how the monarchy is seen, questioned, and ultimately reshaped by those who watch it most closely. And as that reflection deepens, the question becomes harder to ignore. But beyond public opinion lies a deeper question: was Anne's decision purely symbolic, or part of a larger strategy? Princess Anne doesn't make impulsive decisions. Every move she makes is measured, deliberate, and purposeful, which raises a compelling possibility. This wasn't just about Christmas, it was about positioning, about signaling a shift without announcing it. And if that's true, then what appears to be a simple handover may actually be one of the most strategic moves the monarchy has seen in years. Because Anne has always understood something others often underestimate: power in the monarchy is rarely declared. It is transferred quietly, through gestures that appear ceremonial but carry deeper meaning beneath the surface. For decades, she has operated within that understanding, observing patterns, anticipating shifts, and maintaining a balance that few could even perceive. So when she steps aside from a role so closely tied to royal identity, it does not read as retreat. It reads as intention. There is a precision to this moment that feels almost calculated. Not rushed, not reactive, but timed. The kind of timing that suggests preparation long before the public ever became aware. And in that preparation lies a question that lingers just beneath the surface: how long has Anne been planning this transition? Because decisions like this are not born overnight. They are shaped slowly, through observation, through trust, through a quiet assessment of who is ready to carry what comes next. Catherine's selection, in that context, becomes impossible to ignore. This is not simply about capability, it is about alignment. Anne does not choose based on popularity or perception. She chooses based on endurance, on consistency, on the ability to carry weight without needing recognition for it. And over time, Catherine has demonstrated exactly that. Not through dramatic gestures, but through restraint, through presence, through a kind of stability that does not demand attention, yet commands it anyway. What makes this moment even more significant is the method in which the shift occurs. There is no grand announcement, no declaration of change. Instead, tradition itself becomes the vehicle, a familiar structure used to introduce something entirely new. It is subtle, almost invisible to those not looking closely. But within the monarchy, subtlety is often where the most powerful transformations begin. And then there is the timing positioned within a period where the monarchy itself seems to be navigating an unspoken evolution. Expectations are changing. Public perception is shifting. The balance between tradition and relevance is becoming harder to maintain. And in that environment, placing Catherine at the center of such a symbolic role feels less like coincidence and more like preparation. As if Anne is not just responding to change, but guiding it. The idea of grooming becomes unavoidable, not in the obvious sense, not through formal titles or declarations, but through exposure, through responsibility, through moments like this that quietly elevate without forcing recognition. Because real influence, the kind that endures, is not handed over in a single act. It is built through a series of controlled, intentional steps. And this feels like one of them. Yet beneath all of this, there is something more unsettling. A sense that this move is not isolated, that it is part of a larger sequence still unfolding. Because Anne's decisions rarely exist on their own, they connect, they build, they lead somewhere. And if Catherine is being positioned now, if influence is being transferred in this way, then it suggests that what lies ahead has already been considered, which leads to a realization that is both subtle and profound. This is not about a holiday. It is not about ceremony. It is about direction, about shaping the monarchy's future, without ever needing to announce that it is happening. And in that quiet shaping, the most significant changes often take root. And if this is just the beginning, then the future of the monarchy may already be shifting in ways we don't yet fully understand. The monarchy doesn't always change with grand announcements sometimes. It changes in quiet moments like this. A role passed, a responsibility shifted, a signal sent. And as Catherine steps into a position once held by one of the monarchy's most respected figures, a new question begins to take shape. Is this the beginning of a new era, or just the first sign of something much bigger? Because what makes this moment so powerful is not what is being said, but what isn't. There is no declaration of transformation, no official acknowledgement that anything has fundamentally shifted. And yet, everything feels different. The weight of the decision lingers, not as a disruption, but as a quiet recalibration. The monarchy, an institution built on continuity, is evolving, but doing so in a way that avoids resistance, that sidesteps confrontation, that almost dares you not to notice. Catherine stands at the center of that shift, not as a sudden replacement, not as a disruptive force, but as something far more complex, a bridge between what the monarchy has always been and what it is slowly becoming. Her presence carries familiarity, yet her influence suggests change. And that contrast is where the real tension lies. Because the monarchy cannot afford to abandon its traditions, but it also cannot remain untouched by time. Catherine represents that delicate balance, and now, with this role, she is no longer observing that balance, she is shaping it. There is a subtle strategy unfolding here. one that relies not on dramatic upheaval, but on gradual repositioning. Roles are not being removed, they are being reassigned. Authority is not being challenged, it is being redirected. And within that process, a new hierarchy begins to emerge, one that is less rigid, less defined by history alone, and more responsive to the present moment. It is a shift that feels almost invisible, yet its implications are profound. What makes this even more compelling is how seamlessly it aligns with public sentiment. The monarchy has always existed in a delicate relationship with perception, but now that relationship feels more fragile than ever. Trust is no longer rooted solely in tradition, it is earned through connection, through authenticity, through the ability to resonate with a changing audience. And in that landscape, figures like Catherine carry a different kind of authority. Not imposed, but accepted. Not inherited alone, but reinforced through presence and perception. And yet, with every shift comes uncertainty. Because while this transition appears controlled, measured, almost effortless, it raises questions that cannot be easily answered. If this role can be passed so quietly, what else can change just as subtly? If influence can move without announcement, how many other decisions are already in motion, waiting to reveal themselves only when the moment is right? There is also the question of what this means for the structure itself. The monarchy has long relied on clearly defined roles, on a hierarchy that is understood, even if not always explained. But moments like this blur those lines. They introduce flexibility where once there was rigidity. And while that flexibility may offer resilience, it also introduces unpredictability. Because a system that evolves quietly can just as easily transform in ways no one fully anticipates. And so, what we are witnessing may not be a single decision, but part of a larger pattern, one that unfolds slowly, deliberately, almost imperceptibly. A pattern where change is not announced, but absorbed. Where the future is not declared, but shaped through a series of quiet, undeniable shifts. And as this quiet shift continues to unfold, one truth becomes impossible to ignore: some of the most powerful changes don't announce themselves. They reveal themselves over time. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.